Good evening, friends and comrades. My name is Manuel de los Santos, and I'm the co-executive director of the People's Forum. On behalf of all our workers, receive a warm welcome to tonight's conversation. We're honored to have the presence of Camille Chalmers and Sabine Lamour, who are leading voices of the people's movements in Haiti. Haiti and its people are close to our hearts because as students of revolution, we echo the words of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass when he spoke that Haiti was the original and greatest emancipator of the 19th century. It was no small feat to organize a revolution of enslaved workers, defeat several empires, and therefore inspire all of the oppressed of the world, and defining internationalism for centuries to come. But without a doubt, the promise of Haiti to this day still strikes fear and hatred in the hearts and minds of all the rulers who enslave humanity to the chains of capitalism today. We are convened tonight by the unbroken legacy of the rebelliousness of the Haitian people. As we speak, the forces of imperialism continue to hold the bloody hand of violence over Haiti. The ongoing political, social, and economic crisis on the island has reached new heights after February 7th, when President Jovenel Moïse, his term ended. In complete disregard for the Constitution, he has refused to step down. The people, in turn, have mobilized in protests and strikes against this latest attempt by the ruling class and their supporters in the US government, the United Nations, and the OAS to sabotage their democracy. We hope in this conversation to dive deep into an analysis of Haiti's current context, the implications of US imperialism for democracy, and the state of popular struggles. We are grateful to our dear friend and collaborator, tonight's moderator, our friend Mamyrah Dougé-Prosper. And we're exceptionally grateful to our interpreter of the night, Shadine Menard. We join you in this conversation, and we stand with the people of Haiti in the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist struggle. We go on to introduce our moderator, our comrade Mamyrah.
Thank you, Manolo, for these wonderful words. Bonsoir, Ibobo, Forum Pepla. Good evening, People's Forum. And I just wanted to start out by thanking the People's Forum for their continued efforts, right, in terms of building internationalism and their commitment to translating, right, what's happening in all parts of the world to us in the United States in particular. So as Manolo said, my name is Mamyrah Dougé-Prosper. I am a visiting assistant professor of Africana Studies at Davidson College, and also the coordinator of the Pan-African Solidarity Network of Community Movement Builders. And essentially, I am very excited to have, as Manolo mentioned, Sabine and Camille tonight, who are both militant scholars and leaders of grassroots organizations in Haiti, right, who have come to share with us more than just, right, the breaking news that we're seeing headlining our international newspapers, right, and have really come to give us not just a perspective of how to understand what's going on and where we might come in, right, as folks in the US in the belly of the imperialist power, right, to perhaps be in solidarity with people in Haiti more firmly, right, and more successfully, but also to offer us, as Manolo said, a more historical view on the relationship between the US and Haiti for us to understand better, right, how empire functions in the 21st century. And so I'd like to introduce them in the order in which they will speak. At first, we will have Camille Chalmers, who's an economist who teaches at the State University of Haiti. He's the co-founder and spokesperson of the Socialist Party, Rasin Kan Pèp. He's also a co-founder of Haitian Platform of Advocacy for an Alternative Development, PAPDA. And as a director of PAPDA, he's a member of the Popular Patriotic Front and the Caribbean People's Assembly. And after Camille, we'll have Sabine Lamour, who is a sociologist, also teaches at the University State University of Haiti. And she's been working in women's organization as a feminist activist and independent consultant for years. She is the national coordinator of Solidarité Femmes Haïtiennes, Haitian Women in Solidarity, SOFA, which actually is also a founding member of PAPDA. And her research focuses on Caribbean family relations, gender, right, and the organization of the political in Haiti. And so I hope that you will take the time to listen to them carefully. Each person will have about 10 minutes with a little room added to that to really unpack for us what's happening in Haiti. And so I'll cede the spot to Camille. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. C'est avec un pile plaisir que nous avons salué l'initiative People's Forum pour organiser débat ça. Et moi-même avec Sabine, nous pourrons
Hello everyone, it's with great pleasure that we are actually joining for this great debate. Myself and Sabine are going to help you have a clarity on the situation. We salute all the militants and revolutionaries and activists that are helping us with this fight. So evidently, the international press has started speaking about what is going on in Haiti. As with the usual, they usually give us a very limited view of what is happening in Haiti between what is going on with PAPDA, the President Jovenel Moïse, and our president and our people. What is going on is a lot more complicated than that. It is about a program that is effectively. Today, Haiti is facing a crisis that is very deep. We can give several elements very quickly because we don't have a lot of time. The first thing, we have to talk about the characteristics of the 1804 revolution that has given us the structure that we have now between the relationship with Haiti and the other countries. And the imperialism that it introduced in the relationship that those countries had with countries like ours. It is a revolution that was anti-slavery. And slavery was what was dominating the planet in that time. It was also a revolution against the economic model that was in the Caribbean for several centuries. So because of that, we can say that we have a lot of miscommunications between Haiti and the other countries. And that is why they have locked Haiti in a certain type of quarantine so that people don't know the type of stuff that are going on in Haiti. And not only don't they speak of the revolution and nobody knew that they had revolution, but also when they do actually speak of the revolution, they demonize Haitians and they say that we use black magic, voodoo, and a negative view so that they influence other countries in seeing us in a positive light. So they have tried to justify the occupation of MINUSTA, say that Haiti represents a danger. And it is very important to think and reflect upon what kind of danger they are talking about. And that danger is showing that it's a message of revolution that can overthrow imperialism. And on top of that, to understand what is going on with Haiti today, we have to think of some kind of, we did not have a triumphant revolution that did not allow us to really feel its impact, because the other countries had a history of exploitation and domination. And that gave us a sort of battle that was very interesting. And then from there on, we had the people we call paysans, the growers, the planters, who actually became for in the movement. And another thing for us to understand in what is going on today is the invasion of the military from 1915 with the US occupation until 1934. And they constructed some type of dominance where they made it so that Haiti stays under the control of the United States of America. And if you actually look, the United States occupation was not only in Haiti. And this impacted the revolution in all ways. We have the Americas, we have Europe, and all of this put a political system in place where it's not really a government, it's more of an authoritative figure, a dictator that commands, a commander. He does not govern. I thought when I went to work there that we were going to take care of human rights, but then we saw that they were working for the banks, where the entire political system, where all of their strategies to govern is based on the United States of America. And from there, that's where we get into Duvalier and the Duvalierist regime, where he was there to break down all of the people's system, all of the social systems, because that is what the United States needed. And they really wanted that there was no type of structure against the most harsh military regime that there was. So we have a political system that is dominated by choices that do not help it, but hurt it. For example, we have from 1915, the decree that says that even if the government takes a decision, if the American government or army is not in accord, they cannot take that decision. So this system is going to be in crisis. And then in 1986, there is a big movement, public movement, where the Haitians say that this must stop. and they need to change governments. Not this government, not this office that sits on exclusivity, freezing out people, and violence. So they needed to change the government. And also that the government could never actually put this type of government in place. Because all of them that came afterwards never were able to develop the kind of public outcry and organization from 1986. We came at a roadblock. None of them actually had the structure to make the Haitian dream viable or put it into execution. So we have to keep in mind that whether it is Americans or the Haitian government or imperialists, they have to do everything they can to break down this popular movement, the people's movement. So one thing that they did is that they organized a coup against Aristide's government. And it was a game between the powers. It was not a game where the public was a part of it. The coup actually put the public, the Haitian public, on the outskirts of this political movement. And one of the things that's very important to outline is the invasion of Mamyrah that came in 2004 and stayed into 2015. This occupation is very important because it is part of a project of imperialism in the Caribbean, in the fight for political pull and political dominance. So it is very important to see that Mamyrah is there to break all the public manifestations and public outcries and be in charge of the government here. And the other reason is for the Americans to take care of the structure. And their biggest threat is the movements that start not in the outskirts of Haiti, but in the slums, where if you look, that is where the massacres happen, in the big slums, in the big cities, where there's an experimentation going on how there could be a double mechanism of control and repression through control of society with the help of the NGOs that pretend that they are here to help the population. Whereas what they've said is that Mamyrah is there to form Haitian people, to teach Haitian people, but that is not the truth. And that is why in the government, you'll find some militants who were Mamyrah heads and Mamyrah employees and played very big roles, such as the Ministry of Interior. And because of these 13, 14 years of military presence, it's going to aggravate the crisis and the crimes, and especially the massive cases and millions of documented cases of rape against women, whereas there are a lot of children without fathers these days because there were massive and collective rapes against women and children of the region by MINUSTAH. And then another thing that is very important to outline is the case of cholera that never existed in the country in Haiti, and actually by thousands and hundreds of thousands that decimated the area. And projects like October 20th project that are there to realize some kind of structure and accountability. So it's very important to understand that MINUSTAH's function and objective when it comes to the crisis, when it speaks of the success of MINUSTAH, it is to regain control of the Caribbean. And America has a lot to gain of taking control in the Caribbean, especially because of Cuba, that stops them from having total control on the region. And it stops them from having the big lock on the region. So starting from 2010, Haiti has a big problem because of the earthquake. And because of this crisis, they use this crisis to have an even more radical response and bring in the government of PHTK, that is a right-wing party and looks a lot like the modern right-wing party. When you think of Brazil and Ecuador and Paraguay and El Salvador, these governments are very similar, even if you do a little psychology between the PHTK governors and leaders and those leaders. And so they organized a new political structure that had the objective to have absolute control and imperialism. And it's because of that that the mission, the principal mission for PHTK, former President Michel Martelly, and current President Jovenel Moïse, was to eradicate or use all the gangs, the radical gangs that were in the slums, to use them to get total dominance and the dictatorship. And so there are several documents that really get into this. And there are documents that break it down. That there are different zones. And so there's the frank zones of how you're going to go upon the agronomy and in terms of electricity, and also what they've done in Ilavash, their 4 strategies. And the key to making all of this work is taking over land that is owned by the poor. So they need those areas to transform into what they call zone franche. There are a lot of specialists like the Economist of Saint-Jean that said that a lot of the problems the country has about the development of Haiti. It says that the key to reconcentrating Haiti is the constitution of Haiti needs to reduce the parliament's power. So that is the project, is to restructure the constitution and take out some decrees to eliminate dictatorial strategies. And the problem that Jovenel Moïse has is that the election is not part of his agenda. Because election would mean sharing the power. And for them, government is not about sharing. And he wants a dictatorship where he is the one, by decree, that has been taking all of the decisions by decree since January 2020. And it's this dictatorship that has allowed us to have all of this crisis in terms of popular outcry and social breakdown. And so there are people that Jovenel Moïse chooses and chose to work in the palace in a very clandestine way to change decrees in the Constitution. They have not asked or proposed new constitution to the Haitian population. No, they have just taken and made the changes, and it is illegal and anti-constitutional. And there's no legitimate, it is not legal or a legit constitution. Those are not legit degrees. And by the end of 2021, they should be known. So it is because of all of this that we can say that the Haitian population has stood up vigorously with resolve there is a mobilization to say that they want elections, and it has never stopped for the past 2 years. For example, we have had it in 2018 and 2019, where because of the fiscal crisis and the country's budget, the population went out in the street and said that it was a criminalized budget, and they stood against it. And then the population again stood up in 2018 because they had actually heightened and increased oil prices by 24%. And again, there was social outcry and a mobilization. The mobilization of thousands and millions taking to the street, saying that they do not want to go back to dictatorship and that they need elections and they are not okay with living like this in 2020. And now, during the COVID-19 era, the government tried to retake control of the situation. And so there was mobilization of the youth and gangs that organized at least 10 massacres to make the population fear coming out. In November 2018. And it affirms clearly that this government wants to be like the Duvalier regime that wants to reinstall dictatorship and govern as there is only one person that is in charge that makes all the decisions. One that was very much supported by Donald Trump and other imperialist countries. Canada and European imperialist countries, where they supported him regardless of the immoral and illegal massacres and crimes against the Haitian population and Haitian people. And they always supported totally this Haitian government. And right now we have Mrs. Sisson and Mrs. Laline, who are practically militants of PHTK, where they support Jovenel Moïse. They use Jovenel Moïse to stop all popular outcries or movements. And they are using him to stop all revolutions for the ORA and to actually break down CARICOM and any kind of Caribbean movement, budgetary movement to regain control from Americans. And to basically create chaos within CARICOM and break up CARICOM and to really stop elections, general elections, forbid. But today, starting from February 7th, we are in a new era. We are in a new stage because the Constitution says that Jovenel Moïse's reign has finished on February 7th, 2021. But he has refused to step down and has decided to stay in power so that he can accomplish what he set out to do, to change the Constitution, so that he can take and put in power his own personnel that resembles the dictatorship that we lived with Jean-Claude Duvalier. So today we are in a very dire situation where the Haitian population is in danger. Where all of the fears and dangers are intensified. And really we have come in a very dire and questionable situation where they are arresting Supreme Court judges, very illegal and questionable. And we are having a situation where Jovenel Moïse is carrying through an agenda that is not only establishing clear indicators of a dictatorship, but also breaking down Haiti to the profit of imperialist countries and the United States. And when it comes to movements, popular movements, public movements of the Latin America countries, there are a lot of movements that take into account what's happening in Haiti, and it's very important that the Haitian population is implicated in these things. We have, for example, countries from South America that were very, very present in the fight against Mamyrah and the movement against America. And it's very important that I actually salute and acknowledge this solidarity and say that Haiti is really invested in the region, the Latin American region, because we believe that the Caribbean because we believe that the Caribbean people that are a rebellious people have a lot to offer. If we really try to connect those battles in between ourselves, connect our battles, because it concerns all of us and is really important. And we need victory against the government of Jovenel Moïse, and the Haitian people's victory will be a victory for the entire Latin American people. I'm gonna say thank you to Mamyrah and say hello to everybody. Everybody's listening to us in Haiti and a lot of other places. Camille gave us the story a lot more globally, but I am going to speak about the combat, the fight that the women are actually in and how women have had to fight through all of this. Starting with 1915, occupation of the United States in Haiti, the women actually went through a lot because women lost a lot of land. And a lot of people never acknowledge that women were victims of this thievery as well. And a lot of them left and went to Cuba and Dominican Republic. And they did not take into account that the women could not work as hard in the fields like the men, and these women had to become prostitutes to sustain. And so we have to think of the women when we talk about imperialism in Haiti. It had grave consequences on the women as well. And there's also the question of the violent way our bodies were violated. And the women who were part of the Patriotic Union, they were women of the bourgeoisie, the upper class, and they were not happy. They were not happy that it was the women working in the fields that stood against the U.S. occupation. And that is how particularly the women started voting. And it's the kids, a lot of them that were killed, it's their kids that are going to come and do that fight, complete that fight. And there are a lot of women now that we are going to see on the political scene that we did not see. It doesn't mean that we never had women, but it means that we're seeing it on a different level. And consequently, on Salnav, who had a vision that was very socialist, very popular. It was the first time in history that we had women in these positions. And that vision was able to translate in today. And we paid the price. One of the women that was mobilizing was called Tishut. And she was mobilizing, and it's afterwards that we learned about her disappearation. She disappeared. And it's not until after the 1915 occupation that the upper class in 1915 started bringing themselves into the fight and ask, what are they doing in Haiti? Because it was not any type of military or soldiers that were sent into Haiti. They sent Marines to Haiti, to a Black nation. And the women demonstrated resistance, a lot of resistant methods, like standing in front of churches and processions and protests, and spoke to their kids and the men in their lives and their fathers to construct the narrative around the violence against their bodies and how the women were affected. And it's all of these movements, even the right to vote, that made the women had to fight for almost a decade, from 1950 to 1957, facing a lot of insults. And even when we got the right to vote, when Duvalier came up, it was not very easy either. It was not simple. And one of the first things that Duvalier did when he got the power in 1957 was to hire a woman but also one of Duvalier's first acts was also to take out journalists, women journalists, and he actually had women that had their own newspapers. He had the head of that bureau actually beaten, raped, her headquarters completely decimated. And when we talk about violence on our bodies and rape, we look at how it is used as a political tool and an act of terror. And a lot of times rape is overlooked because when they speak of rape, they do not speak to the women themselves. They speak to their brothers, they speak to their husbands, or they speak to other women to say, be careful not to come into the movement, into politics, because this is what can happen. And we have to admit that all of the governments continue to rape, and the Duvalier government the Duvalier communists started to really, with the oppression, and every time a movement, a popular movement came to be, had to have a part on the political scene. The rape was used as a way to tell the women to stay in their place. But at each time, they did a little something for the women to throw them a little bone so the international forces can say, oh, they're safe, nothing's being done to them. For example, the convention that was CEDAW in 1982, after that convention, in 1982, so after that convention and that decree, that was where these women were seen as minors who could not decide for themselves. Afterwards, they allowed them to become adults, where women were actually allowed to make decisions for themselves. Because before, these women were not allowed to act as adults. Their husbands or other people had to make decisions for them. When they are in the populations or on the front lines, they're beaten, they are treated the same way the men are treated. However, Duvalier, when he spoke of the women, he spoke of the women who were not patriots, and he spoke of that was usually the feminists. And he wanted to show that the women had all their liberties when he spoke about them in the international media and international press. However, he was doing a lot of tactics to keep them repressed and oppressed. And a lot of time the press never showed that part. And a lot of time when during the time of Duvalier, when the men left Haiti or had to leave Haiti, a lot of times the women stayed at home with no other recourse, no source of income. They broke up families, and sometimes the women not through any choice of their own, but because they had no recourse, had to be set up with now Makuts at the time, which were Duvalier's hitman, to be able to sustain. And so imperialism and dictatorships actually posed problems in the way we were living. In 1986, before 1986, the 3rd of April 1986, the women took to the streets. And also on February 7th, 1986, they took to the streets to ask that all of the women would be able to participate in the reconstruction of this country. And that is what the feminist movement is about. But the dynamic after that started happening after 1986 were now had this same dynamic starting in 1990 with Aristide, because there was what they called retour à l'ordre constitutionnel, bringing back to constitutional order. So the Constitution now was restructuring, going back on about areas where the voices were not heard, and the women restructured. And these women losing their voice now in 1990, they started to rape them systematically. So one of the biggest fights in Haiti, one of the biggest movements was against the crimes being done against Haitian women. And then so we start hearing about feminism and a lot of other words we hear like imperialism. And America, after the fall of Aristide, came and acted like they were going to implement the same political and public movements, but that was not true. All of the public movements were dismembered, and they were buried them so that they put an end to the dynamic, the political dynamic that was starting to grow and strengthen. And that is when we look at the women's movement, we start to look at a term, the feminism of poverty, the feminization of poverty. For now, a lot of political assets and information that was coming in, they had to back us off. And now the dynamic is that the women had to put on a lot of the burden, carry a lot of the burden. And it's also in that same period and time frame that we had all of the battles against Aristide's reign in 2004 when MINUSTAH came in. And automatically, once MINUSTAH comes in, we are in danger. A lot of political tactics that we don't even have to get into. they they rate people and try to take a country that is one way and make it seem that it was another way. In Haiti, we say "Budawo Pitikari" means your butthole is round and you're trying to fart it into a square. That is literally, but you get the idea. But it was meant to break down the dynamic and the resistance. And that makes us all more vulnerable within what type of resistance that we can put forth. And the last, in 2010, that was the breaking point with the earthquake. And it's true that Haiti got a lot of solidarity and support from the world, but that solidarity came at a price and was beneficial to many. And, okay, and there's a little of what was left in 1804 that allowed what happened in 1987 to be possible. So automatically, when all the NGOs started restructuring Haiti, they started making sure that the political and popularized feminist movements were shut out.
Nous construisons une dynamique politique côté c'est de rapport débalancé que vous avez. Jean yo analysé yo, Jean nous qu'on analyse en termes théoriques. Mouvement féministe construit ça de manière passive depuis 1986 jusqu'à Kounia. Yo dépolitisé, yo venu, yo dit comme ça non ou pas qu'à garder comme ça, c'est sous base VBG pour garder.
Up until now, they are trying to legitimize them and say, no, you cannot look at them like this. However, there were other organizations that wanted to work and help Haiti, but they were not happy. They said, no, these feminist movements were not allowed to. They said that the feminists had to bring forth the documents so that they could be analyzed before they were able to set foot and contribute.
Leur organisation féministe n'a pas d'accord faire ça à un certain moment. Ils ont construit de l'autre organisation qui est d'accord pour tes projets ça ensemble avec vous, qui c'est projet qui dépolitisait tout aspect.
And so in this moment, they had to reconstruct other organizations.
Son mouvement qui enraciné les racines historiques tout dans projet 1804 là tout. Yo pas jamais dit ça mais il est un fait tout que li enraciné tout en d'un projet 1804 là tout avec tout ça que la portée l'a regardé et force politique que le porté dans dernier monde qui a été tiré à qui c'est Tichout l'a analysé tout zap que le fait et tout discours que le porté ou ouais force 1804 là tout.
We have to also think that the political force in Haiti is enriched and rooted in 1804. And the last person that they killed, Tissout, that we spoke about, is rooted in 1804. The way that Haitian women, their role in society, taking care of kids, the household, all of this. Other organizations started emerging. And when they emerged, they did not emerge in a way of battle or carrying on that battle. On the international scale, they assure themselves that the big international media and press that Haitian men are, one of the most vicious and worst type of males, and that Haitian women are always victims. And it invalidates our own experience and takes away power that we cannot gives the narrative that we cannot do anything for our own political fight. And it came to a point where new international politic forces were saying that there are no feminists in Haiti, and so they stopped all financing, the government stopped all financing of any feminist organizations. And if today there are one or two organizations, feminist organizations, that still continue, it's because there were some feminists who said they refused to let the movement die, and they fronted their own money.
C'est-à-dire, c'était des situations tout que vous mettez là-dedans pour te permettre que l'organisation crase en pile organisation.
In a situation where after 2010, when all of this money was to be dilapidated, you had organizations, international organizations, saying they're not going to take money going to feminist movement because there's no structure to take care of that. And when the international community supported the candidacy of Michel Martelly, who was a singer and had no political background, and there was a song that he did in 2008 that showed that he never cared about the feminist movement, and it tells you all about the dictatorship, the modern dictatorship that he put in place, and that was his political project. He has a song in 2008 that was called Bandit Legal, which is legal bandit, legal thief, legal thug. You don't know how, the song says, you don't know how he makes his money. He has a lot of money, and you suspect that the money is coming from an illicit place. But the song only talks about woman as a tool of pleasure. So it's about illegal money and using women as plaything. And this song, when they tells us a lot about this character and his political vision for Haiti, and he got a lot of international support and from the US. And at first, the way he organized his government and power, he used to systematically curse out journalists and women. He called them out the name, said anything, did anything. He had no measure. No professionalism. And this somehow conditions your mind and our way of thinking, because when you have a president that is always cursing out women and talking out of turn to women, it conditions you. And when we talk about these international groups, there were spaces, Spain, Canada, core group. We had France, Spain, Canada, and they literally took the political government in Haiti and restructured it in terms of political silence. They don't say anything. They're just waiting so that the election is not done, and so that they can structure it the way they want to, and so that nothing is done. And right now we're in a period where that Haiti is on its knees. So we weren't yet, in 2010, we hadn't yet even gotten our spears back up, stood back up, but that's when they had taken it upon themselves to make this election with this candidate. With all these hardships that everybody was in the midst of, was this the time for the election? And did they actually understand the political project that Martelly had for Haiti? Because that legal thug project that he had was core group solidarity a real solidarity? Or is it the type that they, is it the type that they tried to give to Cuba to help it get into the crisis that it is? Systematically, Cuba sent people to help us here, but they did not want to let them. The United States basically locked down who was able to help Haiti or not in that area during the earthquake era. The people who always show us solidarity, they could not even come in to give us aid. And all of these elements contributed to Michel Martelly being strong in the election. The voting organization and people had a lot of protests against how this transitional government was going to proceed.
Parce que pas oublier tout que c'est même moment tout que y a plein de monde qui c'est de monde qui très bien placé sur le plan politique.
And when we are talking about this, we have to look at how economy.
Même monde qui était responsable parlement États-Unis t'es obligé de venir arrêter parce que en fonction de bonnes clauses que haïtien pas même comprendre toute dynamique qui des clauses ça yo pour yo prendre monde ça yo pour y aller ensemble avec yo à un certain moment pour extrader yo vers les États-Unis. Et c'est dans toute dynamique ça tout que l'argent a circulé par contre l'argent a sorti de mode comme ça que élection pour le fait tout en dedans société. Et leur élection ça yo fait par exemple le nous gagne élection qui vient fait et qui portait monsieur Jovenel Moïse au pouvoir yo faut nous admettre que c'était moment nous t'ai fait face avant que monsieur arrive au pouvoir nous fait face à une grave crise écologique côté que t'ai gagné un gros ouragan de catégorie 5 à peu près qui était passé sur Haïti qui c'était ouragan Macho qui crasait tout sud pays et on morceau dans nos pays et qui dit qui crasait sud qui crasait grandance pays c'est-à-dire tout grenier qui fourni on morceau dans Port-au-Prince manger. C'est-à-dire nous t'ai fait face à une crise et c'est dans même crise ça tout que dynamique électorale ça va amorcer et qui va le permettre que monsieur ça lui-même que nous gagne là actuellement lui monter au pouvoir. C'est-à-dire regarder à chaque fois comment est-ce que utiliser de crise et de problèmes que nous capable gagner qui capable de problèmes certes qui pas dépendre de eux qui c'est que ce soit ces séismes que ce soit ces cyclones mais c'est des moments de vulnérabilité nous que à chaque fois impérialiste a imposé nous mode monde ça yo dans tête l'état. Et n'a regardé tout comment est-ce que crise d'après commencer automatiquement que monsieur a monté au pouvoir parce que monsieur a élection contestée, il pas reconnaître comme chef d'État. D'ailleurs, quantité haïtien qui votait par rapport avec quantité population et population ba un vote de censure, il pas à voter. C'est-à-dire monsieur a est capable d'une président effectivement sous forme légale, mais sous forme il pas légitime par rapport avec quantité monde qui t'est voté là à l'époque que il était gagné élection. Et c'est comme ça tout, tant que Jean-Camille t'a montré là, nous voyons qu'en 2016, il y a une manifestation contre monsieur. Monsieur a monté sous pouvoir en 2016. Nous avons regardé tout en 2017, il y a une crise budgétaire. Et nous avons regardé tout jusqu'en 2018, il y a une grosse crise qui s'est crise 6-7 juillet 2018 là. Et depuis le ça tout, nous entrons dans le cadre de mobilisation côté que n'a demandé monsieur a imposer le temps qu'on autorité effectivement, comporter le temps qu'on président dans la société, apporter réponse avec crise que la société a traversée. Et monsieur a pas jamais en mesure, m'a dit président, c'est voulu, et monsieur a pas jamais en mesure pour lui répondre de crise que la société a traversée. Et il pas jamais mettre à la hauteur politique pour le répondre tant qu'on dirigeant politique, t'as de répondre face à un problème, à des problèmes chroniques comme population. La population, hein. Li prend de, au lieu que li répondre avec crise là, li gen une bonne lot bagay que la fait qui va
parce que Chadine a reconnecté pour nous assurer la traduction. Hein?
OK.
D'accord.
OK. Et dans la crise 2018
Non, tellement un petit moment.
OK.
Faut nous revoyer link là pour moi, ou bien petit bouton côté moi métier pour moun yo ka wem, pour moun yo ka tande.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
OK, allez-y.
OK. Et dans la crise 2018 là, n'a regardé un principal élément qui peut faire que crise après le
Okay, in the 2018 crisis, we have to look at the fact that the population is asking for an actual accountability of what is going on with the money that was in the government's hands. And all of the money from Petro-Caribe that was there to assure that our lives could actually have some sort of cushion for all of the development that was to allow development in quotation marks. When we look at all of the organizations that are within the Haitian society, women's organization, the bank organization of students and youngsters, all came up and asked for accountability for these funds. And we ended up realizing that PHTK spent this money and completely, and there was records where they had bought houses in Miami. And if we look at the prototype for illegal thugs, it is about the private benefits and looking as they are flossing and have very deep pockets. It was not about the population's benefits. It was not about the public's needs. And when we look at any kind of fight here, whether it is the 17th of October when they killed our father Dessalines, whenever they cannot find any kind of solution or answer, our people have that dynamic of overthrowing the power, and that person has to leave their position of power. And it's not that they were not, it's not that we hadn't had this before, but it was about the gross mismanagement of these funds and how many people participated in the spoils of this money, the excess waste of this money. And so 14 of November 2018, there was a massacre, and a big massacre in La Saline, and there was never ever accountability. And there were also a lot of rapes, and where these women are not even allowed the opportunity to go out because these are what we call those slums, those very small quarters where they are not allowed the opportunity to go out and get help. And each time it was collective rapes, a lot of rape. And every time there are movements where there's lockdowns, where the society is completely at a standstill, and all political entities and society said they are going to stop society and stand still to ask for the government to step down. When that happens, we find that us that are in the feminist organizations, we find that automatically these things become more dire, these situations. So we have to look at the situation also, because a lot of the times these two women can't go out, but they are in situations in their house where we have to admit that, you see, a lot of us, even not in the slums, cannot eat. You are in bad situations. So a lot of these women, thugs took them and raped them and went away with them when they were on their way to sell in the streets, to the street markets. And so from there, we are seeing that things that used to happen in 1991, that is when the configuration of rape changed, where they started raping women in throws. And people will say that these standstills are the reason people can't eat in this society and can function in society. But there's a certain point where the government has to see that they haven't given any benefits to society, any social program, and they haven't gotten any accountability to say we're going to step down. No, there's not one moment where they ever acknowledged us. And when manifestations and protests started really amplifying in 2019, and so when the society wanted the government to separate its dictatorship, its government, they started putting the pressure, the government started putting the pressure on cities. And there's such bad security breaches that people don't feel they can walk around after 5, 6, 7 p.m. once it's dark. And when you're a woman, we cannot go out in the street anyway. We cannot go alone. And we become at a point like somebody who's been thwarted. You depend on a companion, a significant other, somebody else who is going out. We are in a situation where it's not COVID that made the violence against women increase. The lockdown also has. Imagine if the person you're living inside the house with, if the situation, if the relationship was already explosive or stressed, being in close quarters for so long, we are not, that part of society is not the type to traditionally ask for help in personal relationships. It is not the upper class that have a certain, they are used to being stayed together and keep it within the family. So when in the lockdown, you are 2, 3, 4 months in the same house with that person, it is a danger. So when lockdown for COVID happened in other countries, we were already deep in lockdown, political lockdown. And when it came down to gangs, when
gang sa yo gen zam nan men yo, et c'est deux zam gen de nom de députés, de sénateurs ou bien
So,
de monde qui bien placé en dans société.
the gangs were really well placed within society to help the government terrorize and become having a relationship with the gangs. There are congressmen and senators where there's suspicions for them that when they have, you know, the suspicions aren't even established, but when they're kidnappings, their people are released. Why do they release these people? It's their people. And the thing with the kidnapping is they don't just ask for ransom. That is true that they are impoverishing certain families, and some people have to get the funds from the state. But it's not only that, it's not only economically, they also not only economically break down a family, but they rape women. And it's not just about financial, it's about power. And so it establishes a situation of terror within our society. And so this terror is deep-rooted within the society now. And so now we are in a situation like Camille has told us where so that there's always some kind of empathy, international empathy. They have chosen, the government has chosen to put certain women in the forefront to show that, hey, we have women. It's a government that has women at the forefront, that has a good relationship with women. And there's a part of the international community that says, hey, this is not a problem in Haiti for real. Actually, Haiti is a country, this is a government that values women because they put the women forward. And they put the woman in the forefront with the community, the international community's blessing, because they are using these as tools to paint a rosier picture on the international level.
Toute information qu'on partage, toute analyse que nous partageons avec nous à soya, et puis nous demandé public là. This is the time where the public can ask some questions. I think we've received a lot of information to digest. Manolo, I think
we wanted to do an analysis for you of the situation.
But since we don't have a lot of time, I wanted to ask, I think, one extremely important question that everyone who's listening, I assume, has right on this end. I've been getting a lot of emails and calls from people about what can we do right in the United States. Qui ça que public People's Forum dans son public États-Unis qui a demandé nous qui ça que nous besoin comme action concrète de solidarité dans le moment ça. On pense que si nous pas prendre l'autre question yo et nous capables au moins finir avec 2-3 actions concrètes que nous capables proposer.
So people have been asking, what do we need as a sign, a show of solidarity support?
Quelques secondes.
In the community.
If you could share for us, right, what kind of
so in a few seconds, if you could share.
Who are mostly located in the United States, right, could do, right? What is it that we can do here on the side, in the belly of the beast, right, to support grassroots movements in Haiti? So this is, we don't have time for many more questions, but I think this is perhaps the question that's burning on everybody's mind, right? What can we do besides being informed, right? Quelques secondes qui voulait commencer. Quelques secondes.
Bon, moi-même, je pense que l'action amplifiée voix, c'est une action qui est très, très importante parce que et gain de parfois tout ou même lors des organisations ou vient jeune que gain une vassalisation tout de médias qui c'est médias traditionnels parce que actuellement faut nous admettre que gain un pile répression sur médias en ligne qui fait que bagay yo a sorti que ça soit sur Facebook.
Okay, well, there are different actions that you can take. For sometimes when you're looking at organizations, you feel like on the media, Facebook, Twitter, saying what is going on, it is a fundamental, it is a basic work that needs to be done. It is using the tools of using the tools at our disposition, social media tools, to show that Haiti is being a tool for the imperialist countries and the American country, the United States and international countries to do what they want as far as the government. We know that we have internal problems, but let us sit and be part of the solution and find a solution to the problem. You can be around the table to help us, but you cannot be at the forefront if you're international. And you are not the one to be saying if the Constitution needs to be rewritten or to be giving money to a government that you know is reinforcing the problems that we have and that the government is not on the people's side. Because this project is not just going to be good just for Haiti, but it's going to be for the entire country, the entire world. It's the project that since 1804, all of the movements, the social movements have been asking for. It's just rights. Since 1804, we've been asking rights, that all of the rights be acknowledged and be respected. Rights of the women, rights of the people. Share the information of what's happening in Haiti, the dire situation that's happening in Haiti, the grave situation it is. Require that they inform themselves, require that they don't just vote blindly. Do not recognize, do not acknowledge, do not claim this President Jovenel Moïse, and do not accept his changing of the Constitution, his decrees.
De façon que nous avons un système électoral qui permet que le peuple haïtien exprime. Donc, il est extrêmement important que
and to allow us to get out of this so that the Haitian population can actually get out of this. And it's very important to show the real story of what's going on. And it's not that we like the fight, it's just the Haitian people are taking a stand to defend our project of liberation. It's a long-term project, it's not just for today. And we have to fight as well to support and stand with the Haitian population as they want to construct and build another government body. And for us to rupture with this dictatorship that we have, the system of domination that we have right now, where international parties are making decisions, like the American embassy, when it says that it's going to examine the validity of Jovenel Moïse's claims. There is an arrogance because this is a population that knows what it wants. The Haitian people, the fact that it can mobilize and that it can apply pressure on different senators, deputies, congressmen in the United States, it shows that we want and there is possibility for a new relationship between Haiti and the United States. And it is very important that there are more voices that express themselves in favor of the Haitian population. And for us to organize more manifestations, more protests, send letters to Biden, to congressmen. We need to be the voice, important voice of the people against dictatorship. And also the organization, if judges could write the MINUSTA and UN officers in Haiti, that would help tremendously.
Organize ourselves here in the States, right, towards showing a uniform front of solidarity with Haiti. There are some questions that came up about folks looking for resources to read more on Haitian popular movements. Maybe on the People's Forum site, we could propose a syllabus that folks could come to look to read about and from Haitians themselves writing. And so, Manolo, I'm going to invite you back in so we can wrap up the event.
Mamyrah,
Oui,
une question très importante que tu voulais soulever
vas-y.
par rapport à arrêter que Jovenel Moïse prend pour les faire.
There's a very important question that was posed, that was questioned. A very important question that was asked.
C'est un crime contre paysan, c'est un crime contre souveraineté alimentaire paysan, c'est un crime contre possibilité, parce que zone que pour le prendre sont zones extrêmement stratégiques. C'est une rare zone plate que nous gagnons 44 000 hectares.
So there is an area in Haiti where the Haitian government has decided to sell for Coca-Cola to actually produce for Coca-Cola, and is a very fertile ground and land.
And
it is a very fervent cry to stand against this, to show how Coca-Cola is actually taking money and food away from the Haitian population. And they have taken land away from women in certain areas so that they can make ecological projects and eco projects that are married with politics. They've taken people's land. So we always fight against the big plantation as a project. It will not return in Haiti. It is these type of projects, political projects, that actually bring conflict.
Est-ce que ça veut dire tout que projet ça c'est lui-même qui a passé là avec 44 000 caractères que vous bail à PAPDA par exemple et que vous bail à PAPDA et en pile il y a un pile américain tout que vous pas dit tout qui joignent tête tout la question ça parce que il y a un pile américain qui cité que vous joignent tête tout.
And there are a lot of Americans that have also acknowledged that they found land as well. And we have to see what is he doing on, as with the Haitian imperialism to actually retain power, and what is he using to retain power.
manufacturing parks, right? And less so tourism, right? So when we think also about acts of internationalist solidarity, it asks us too in the global north to think about the kinds of things that we're consuming, right? Coca-Cola, for example, or clothing from Gap and Walmart, etc. Right? I know leftists are going to go, I already don't do that, right? But just thinking about part of the struggle is also, right, within our overdeveloped societies here in the global north, right? What we're consuming that drives this machine, right? That drives the dispossession of folks like the members of SOFA, right, from their ancestral lands. So I think that's another thing for us to think about as a concrete action in solidarity with more than just Haiti, of course. So Manolo, I'm ceding you the floor. Thank you everyone for your patience. And I hope this has been informative and clear, right, in terms of the ask that's coming from the ground.
Thank you so much. We are very grateful for Mamyrah's presence with us tonight. Thank you for all that we've learned from Sabine and Camille. Very grateful for Shadine's interpretation tonight, and for everyone who made tonight's conversation possible. Like Mamyrah said, we leave with very clear demands of the Haitian popular movements for us in terms of concrete solidarity in this coming period, that we have to insist and continue to agitate the forces that be in the North, in the United States, in Washington, to continue to put pressure so that another dictatorship is not imposed on the Haitian people. But we also know that in the long term, our struggle is a fight for socialism, a fight for a different type of society where we no longer have an imperialist force imposing its will on another people. Thank you so much for joining the People's Forum. This night conversation will be retransmitted in English and made available to all, as well as we will have summaries and more follow-up actions, information, and resources to share with all of you. Again, thank you and have a good night.
Merci, nous-mêmes.
Merci en pile.
Merci en pile.